I'd like to welcome you all to Soup with Substance. Soup with Substance is a weekly program that highlights social justice and peacemaking topics over a simple lunch of soup and bread. And our sponsor for this soup is the Center for Peacemaking. And so today's event is being recorded, and the recording can be found later on Campus Ministry's YouTube page. And I'm going to pass things over to Ibtisam now, who will be introducing our panelists.
Good afternoon. My name is Ibtisam Abujad. I'm a doctoral student instructor in the English department. My research engages intersectional conceptions of equity, intersectional identities, and Muslim cultural productions and decolonial social practices. So this is very central to what I do, and I thank you all for being here. Anti-racism in spiritual communities was developed at this time, or was conceived of at this time, because the pandemic did kind of shed light on the inequities that are prevalent in our communities, especially in relation to access to healthcare, access to education, access to community building organizations, economic access. So the panel discussion is aimed at examining anti-racism efforts in Milwaukee and discussing the ways in which spiritual communities, organizations, and institutions can collaborate to resist injustices and ensure equity. Our speakers today are Rhonda Hill, who has spent over a decade focusing on issues of racism and poverty. Her commitment to raising awareness about racism is seen through her previous work with the Milwaukee Social Development Commission, the YWCA, the Greater Milwaukee Synod of the ELCA, and most recently with the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. Rhonda holds dual degrees, an MS in Marriage and Family Therapy and an MA in Theological Studies. She founded Race and Faith in 2014 with the goal of helping churches, faith groups, educational institutions, and nonprofit corporate leadership engage in conversation to unpack racism, create community, and deepen understanding of how one's belief system informs participation in racial justice. Also, speaking today is Sharon Chubbuck. Dr. Sharon Chubbuck has engaged in race, faith, and education issues since the 1970s. Originally from Central Illinois, where she taught school and with her husband led in a multiracial congregation, Sharon earned her PhD in education at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. She joined the College of Education at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 2001, where she continues her research and teaching focus on racial equity in education. In 2014, she joined Rhonda Hill as co-founder of Race and Faith. Will Perry, who is unable to be with us today, is Executive Director of Milwaukee Islamic Dawah Center, MIDC, where he leads by balancing equal doses of dedication, dynamism, and dependability. One of the highlights of MIDC during his leadership period is developing Ibrahim House, a prison reform program that assists fellow Muslims to reintegrate into the community. Another is overseeing its highly recognized food pantry that partners with Feeding America and is known as one of Wisconsin's top 5 pantries. Perry has a master's degree in management from Cardinal Stretch College. He is a former Marine firefighter paramedic and a past funeral director for a Milwaukee Muslim funeral home. Currently, he's board president of Wisconsin Muslim Civic Alliance, board member of MICA, and member of Milwaukee Common Council's Community Collaborative Commission. We also have Sheikh Nouman Hussein, who was born and raised in the Chicagoland area. He began his pursuit of knowledge locally, and by the age of 11, he completed the memorization of the Quran. To further his learning in the Islamic sciences, Sheikh Nouman traveled to South Africa, where he graduated from the Islamic University in Johannesburg, South Africa. Currently, Sheikh Nouman serves as the Imam and resident scholar at the Islamic Society of Milwaukee in Brookfield, Wisconsin. He is also a high school instructor at Salam School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He's a cabinet member of the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee and the co-convener for Begin, Brookfield Elm Grove Interfaith Network. He's particularly active in interfaith initiatives, youth engagement, and community outreach. He resides in Brookfield, Wisconsin with his wife and 5 kids. And I welcome you all for being here today. Each of our panelists will discuss the work that they do. Beginning with Rhonda Hill, would you like to begin discussing? Rhonda Hill and Dr. Sharon Chubbuck talking about the Sankofa project.
Okay, thank you. Well, as was shared, I am founder of Race and Faith, and our work is centered in really helping those interested in becoming anti-racist investigate their belief systems and how their belief systems either aid in oppression or help them fight against oppression. And so we have been busy since 2014. And with our work, we provide educational opportunities for people to engage in topics that would help them better understand what racism is about, the whole system of racism and white supremacy, and how they have their own resources to begin to fight against the system. So, and Sharon will share a little bit about our framework and how we help people investigate with all of who they are, the whole issue of racism. So with that, we have learning opportunities. We have a book club. The Sankofa project that you mentioned, it was started because of the pandemic. And with the Sankofa projects, it's different from our work. We mainly educate, consult, and coach organizations, but this was a passion project because of the pandemic. And when I learned of how communities of color were being adversely impacted by COVID, I really thought it was important because we have not only the virus, but also racism. And so with the onslaught of racist comments, attacks, and slurs towards the Asian community, I definitely wanted to do something and felt like I needed to do something to give a little extra love and care to those of us who are people of color and know the weight of what it means to not be white in society. And so that project, Sankofa is a West African word. It has its own symbol, but it means to go back and fetch it. And so I felt this project is saying we're going to go back and reach for those of you that we care about and love, to let you know that while society may be trying to push you back or push you down, we haven't forgotten about you. And so that project is a care box where I put in different items just for people to care for themselves, and also added in a pamphlet that shared information about racism, mental health, and grief. Because of course, those are central things still that we are dealing with in the pandemic. And so that project last year, we gave away 100 boxes to families, partnered with Catholic Charities, 411, and another organization, the African American Roundtable, to disperse some of those boxes to folks who I trusted they knew needed a little extra care. So that was the Sankofa project, and that's what that was about. And it's still ongoing. I just found it to be something that as people got that, that's free. You know, it's not, you didn't have to be poor, you know, because usually you put that like, oh, you have to be below the poverty line or something for people to show you a little extra loving. Well, this wasn't that. It was basically, you know, I see you as a person of color, and I want to let you know that you matter and you count. So here's a little something extra to take care of yourself. By way of, we had incense in there, colorings, candles, all kinds of things, prayer beads or crystals, just a variety of different things to help people center and relax, but also learn more about how to better care for themselves emotionally. But we do have a book club. And when you mentioned your work and what you're interested in, I thought you might be interested in the book that we're starting. It starts on Tuesday. Our book club is that you don't have to read the whole book to come, but we read the book together week after week. The book is called As We Have Always Done by Leanne Betasmaki Simpson. I might not be saying that correctly, but it is about indigenous resistance and looking at how the indigenous community have always fought, but really being radical. She has a lot of different ideas about how to move forward in an even more radical way and reject contemporary colonialism. So it's going to be a deep read, but an interesting read nonetheless. And so I don't know are you familiar with that book?
I'm not. Is it Leanne Simpson?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm familiar with her and her work, but I'm not the book, and I would love to be a part of it.
When you mentioned where you were interested, I was like, oh, you might really be into this book. So it's called As We Have Always Done. So I'm interested in digging into it and reading more. And the book club is really just that a easy entry point for people who want to start learning more about other cultures, learning about their own racism, and really investigating the subject more in an intellectual way, but with other people. So it's very casual. Come as you are ready to come. Doesn't matter if you haven't read the whole book, just jump in where you're at. And that is Tuesdays at 5:30. So this Tuesday, we'll start this new book at 5:30, and it's online. So that information, I can get that to you or to Amanda, and that can be put out there. We also have a course called Entry Points, where it's for people who are just getting started into understanding what it means to be anti-racist. And so that's a 4-week course that I do with Sharon. And we start that April 8th. So it's 2 hours in the evening to 6 to 8. And that information can be made available as well. But we have a framework that I think make our work special and a little bit different, because I've been a part of many anti-racist conversations. Some of you all may have too. And it's really intellectually focused, as if people are racist because they're dumb. But that's really not it. It's a lot of very, very smart people who are racist. So it's not always about how much information we can pump into a person, but we really say you have to investigate the matters of the heart and the soul, really what people believe. So Sharon, you want to jump in with that?
I sure will, Rhonda. Thank you. Rhonda is the energy, the genius, and the brain power behind Race and Faith, and invited me to come along, and it's been a real gift. My role in it has been a lot of the educational piece with her, and so Entry Points was our starting point. We tried to think about what, as she said, particularly in faith communities, or at least the faith communities that I've had the most exposure to, which oftentimes have been Protestant Christian groups. We tend to live in our heads, and we tend to think that the problems of the world can be answered with information. And if you look at the words of Jesus said, you relate to God, you relate to each other as whole people, not as brains. And so we adopted that mindset to say, can we engage people as whole people in this conversation about racism and anti-racism and white supremacy? So love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So we want to engage about racism with our hearts, which are our emotions, with our minds, which is the intellect, with our soul, which is and these might be a little sketchy definitions, but I think they work with a little wiggling. Our soul is the ethics, the faith base, the part that is not just what I know or what I feel, but what my compelling conviction is. And then body is, what do you do with it? What's happening? Literally your physical embodiment as you want to pursue this. And so that's the model that we've tried to adopt. And what we found is that a lot of I find it myself that I want to go back to my head because it feels like I can control that. I can control the information I'm getting in. I can sort it. I can categorize it. I can be an academic and critique it. I can toss out this and keep that. And it's a very safe place. That said, information is vital because ignorance can kill, and ignorance can allow a lot of violence to continue. So we offer people information, but as we go through our workshops with folks, we regularly stop and say, let's do a check, temperature check. What's happening in your mind right now? What's happening in your emotions? What's happening in your faith? Is it being roused up at that level? And what is your body literally saying to you physically? Is is your stomach in a knot? And where's your body going to take you to act out what you're learning here? Again, we go to our heads, partly because the emotion is scary. It's uncomfortable. It can be painful. And what we have found is when we stuff the emotion away, our growth stops. And so whatever we learn in our heads, if we don't in parallel say we're going to deal with, process, think about, explore, face the emotional responses we're having, we won't grow. And if we don't change in our our belief systems of what we think is morally right, we don't grow. And if we don't act on what we've learned, we don't grow. So that's been our approach. Whole people encountering God, encountering each other, encountering the question of white supremacy and racism. That's our framework. So Ron, did you want to add anything more to that?
I don't. I'm open for the next set of questions or listening to what other people are up to on this panel.
Sheikh Nauman, would you like to talk about your work in the Islamic Society of Milwaukee?
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, it's good morning for me. It's 3:30 a.m. in India. I'm at my Airbnb, and I try to get a fancy background for you guys with the limited equipment that I have here. Brother Will Perry joined the meeting, and I actually would prefer if he went first. I'm just happy to be on the panel. I don't think I deserve to be on this panel, but I will defer to Brother Will Perry first, and then I guess I can share some thoughts after he goes.
Welcome, Brother Will.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Imam, everyone. I guess my audio and visual is okay right now?
Yes.
Okay. I certainly appreciate my dear Sheikh and Brother Imam. I love you and I miss you. I didn't realize you were leaving until just a few minutes ago. So I pray that you have a safe trip back home and everything goes well with you there. Again, my name is Will Perry. I'm with the Milwaukee Islamic Dawah Center. And what I'd like to share with you, and I have a Sheikh Imam who's a scholar, and I'm not going to try to attempt to cover this in a scholarly fashion, just from a grassroots experience from Milwaukee Islamic Dawah Center and my own personal experience in regards to racism. And what I'd like to just cover with you is simply one of the tenets of Islam. And one of those tenets is the rights of our neighbors. And in Islam, our neighbors have specific rights and we have specific duties that are unique in that our neighbors are entitled to a great deal of our respect and love and also our honor in regards to in servicing their needs. Now, the neighbor does not have to be Muslim. The neighbor does not have to necessarily be one that's close to you. It's the other human beings that live around you and you come in contact with. It's the other persons that you share a commonality with, and that is we're all children of Adam. And so as Sheikh Nauman, I'm sure he can cover that as far as our relationship with Adam and our unity and oneness and humanity. As far as an Islamic tenet and Islamic fundamentals is concerned, we're all children of Adam, first and foremost. So what I wanted to do is just bring that into focus in regards to our work that we're doing, just specifically in our food pantry. Now, for the last 14 years, the Milwaukee Islamic Dawah Center, with support of Islamic Society of Milwaukee and individuals who are donating money every single week and every single month to help to support and feed those who have food insecurity and who are going through some challenges in regards to food and feeding their families and mental and physical health as far as good nutrition is concerned. So over the last 14 years, we've had an opportunity to be of service to the greater Milwaukee and Madison and Racine community in that simply by providing good food, good fresh fruit and vegetables and some meats to individuals who otherwise may have to use the money for something other than food, like keeping the heat on, keeping the lights on, and making sure that their children, receive a hot meal for breakfast and preparing them for school and making sure that their brains and their minds and their bodies are ready to go to produce and be productive members of our society. So as a simple thing as, providing good, healthy and wholesome food for people, over the last 14 years, we've worked very closely with Feeding America. And that's our source of a food product from them. And so last year, I think we did over 1 million pounds of food last year. And so from on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, every week, rain or shine, no matter what the weather is and what's going on with holidays and that sort of thing, even through this pandemic on last year, we've been out on our parking lot and out at various locations providing food subsidies for individuals who come. And it's not confined to just Milwaukee or a particular zip code. Right now we're serving over 20 different communities around the Milwaukee, Madison, and Racine area that range from the Clinton Rose Center to the Martin Luther King Center to 2 or 3 mosques in on the south side of Milwaukee, the Burmese community, the Latino community. We've got up in Madison, we've got a few communities there, Islamic organizations there, and also the local non-Islamic organizations that we're transporting food. Folks are coming down from Madison, picking up food products here and taking it back to Madison, and we're taking it and delivering it to a number of places around in the city of Milwaukee. And again, this is all about sharing with your neighbor and looking out for your neighbor. Now, most of these folks will never see the Dawa Center, will never come to the Dawa Center. They don't know where the food is coming from. They only know that a couple of us show up with a truck. We've got boxes of food. We've got cases of fresh produce and product and so on. And we're not asking anything from them. We're asking them simply to take the food stuff if they need it. And if they need more, if we've got more, we're going to give it. We're going to give what we got. We don't keep anything here. On average, every single day, we've got somewhere between 1 and 2 trucks, and each one of those trucks can carry about 30,000 pounds of food. And so folks are lining up here, and they see the Muslim Community Center, logo on the outside of our building. And so in that way, they relate that to Muslims doing good in the community. We've never had an issue with vandalism or any type of hate-related incidences at our mosque as long as I've been here, and I've been over here for over 20 years. And we're right here, Teutonia and Locust, one of the hot spots in the community. And every single person that comes around and walks past here or comes in contact with us here, they know that's the place over there that has a good food product. Or that's the place over there I can come to and find it when I need something. For the most part, they can pretty much get it here. We have an open relationship with all of our members that come through here over the last over 25 years that we've been here and at this same location. And we have very good relationships with our Christian and Jewish community friends as well. We've got the Jewish community, Shalom on the east side, that they bring some product in and we distribute their product. And sometimes if they need something, if they want something, we'll send something over there as well. And there are a number of church groups that come through here. I mean, on a regular basis. I don't know how many of them we have here because we're right here in the north side where we got a lot of faith-based organization, whether it be the Christian-based, Lutheran, Protestant, or whatever. We're all associated with that. Again, as was mentioned, I'm with Micah, so I make sure that the folks in Micah know what's going on whenever we have a pantry and what's available to those members as well. So the focus on being good neighbors, the focus on giving without having to get anything in return, for the reason only of as being a fundamental part of our worship, our faith-based relationships with our Creator and with those with our neighbors. So this has been a wonderful experience for me, in that just of being of service, as was mentioned, as a firefighter for almost 30 years, my whole life, adult life, has been being of service to the community. Unfortunately, in most cases, it's been on an emergency basis, life-saving issues that come up within our community. But that's prepared me for the other side of things and being a part of the community, as being more of service after the emergency is over. So now we're dealing with families on a more intimate level in regards to their day-to-day lives, from individuals that are coming out of the institutions from prison to kids, going through this COVID piece, and the families are trying to look for things to do as to making sense of all of this. So we offer that, as the Imam, I'm sure, will go over, the spiritual aspect of offering some sense of hope to individuals in a time that appears to be of hopeless. And this seems to be running rampant in our society as a whole. So it's critically important for us to, as interfaith and groups, and that we understand and know that we base our understanding on Islam based on the tenets of Islam, the principles on Islam, and not from those who profess to be Muslim but do something otherwise. So we have not to simply judge the book by its cover, but take a look at the contents and the essence of that particular way of life. So I wanted to just share that little bit with you as far as the rights of the neighbors in Islam and what our duties are to one another. And the food pantry in itself, we can talk about, things that go on there. We have people that come in and not only learn about, sharing and giving to one another without any conditions, but also learn a lot more about Islam and who Muslims really are. And that's one of the really important parts as to, what Islam is being portrayed as being on the media, as to what happens in real life for folks on the ground, and who's being of service to whom, and why we're doing what we're doing here. My family, I'm the only Muslim in my family. All of my family members are Christian. Our Baptist background. I grew up in the Baptist church, and I converted to Islam back in the 70s. And so my relationship with my family's member is critically important. I have to cherish the womb that bore me. My mother, I just left her just a few minutes ago. And I make sure that to the best of my ability, she gets what she needs still, regardless of what our different faiths are. So I owe that to my mother, and I'll never simply be able to repay her for the fact that she is my mother. And that's a gift that I owe her and that I can never repay. So, and that too, we have that relationship with particularly with the sisters that come here, because we have a lot of sisters that come. And when I say sisters, that's out of respect. They don't have to be Muslim to be my sisters. So sisters in humanity as children of Adam. So when our sisters come here, and a lot of them are coming here with children, boy, I mean, just to see the looks on their faces when the kids leave with a bag full of apples or grapes, or they get some snacks or something that, they can take home and enjoy that, as opposed to paying, some of these boxes, my dear brothers and sisters, some of these boxes are about $100 worth of product in them. So you've got potential. If you take a look at the purchases that were made, that could have been made for some of this food stuff we're giving them. Some of the folks, maybe you'll see some of the videos as we do our ramp up for Ramadan. You'll see some of the products that go out here, subhanAllah, they're very, it's a very nice package. It's a very nice package. So all of you are invited. If you're here in Milwaukee or whatever, you're invited to come down any Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday at about 9 o'clock in the morning. You can volunteer, take a look at what we're doing. And this has been going on, like I said, for over 14 years. And sometimes we have our young people in here. We have folks that come in from other communities that want to be a part of it. And you're all welcome to come. And it's very fulfilling, very rewarding to be of service. So, and that's what this is all about, just simply being of service. So I hope this, my little talk, I didn't prepare a speech or anything. And even though I got the notice in a timely fashion, I don't always review that before I get started. So I'm just kind of hitting this thing cold. So as we do, we respond and work on our feet. Sometimes that works the best. Sometimes you get the most genuine responses when it's not a canned one. You get what's from the heart, usually reaches the heart. And so I appreciate each and every one of you and all of that you do. But I'm going to ask one thing of you. I'm going to step away for about 5 minutes or so. I still have to go back and pray, because everyone was praying and I was in there trying to connect with you guys. So my effort in being a good neighbor is making sure that you see my face and hear from me before I have to step away a little bit. So I hope that you can excuse me for a couple of minutes and I'll come back. Is that okay?
Of course, yes.
Okay. I'll be right back. Okay.
Thank you very much, Brother Will.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Knaman, would you like to talk about your work?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you guys are well. I want to start off by thanking all of the organizers for putting this panel together and for having me. I've been serving as an imam in the Milwaukee area for the last 10 years or so. My work isn't necessarily or particularly one area. I am fortunately and unfortunately wear many different hats, whether that be a religious director or be a youth director, whether it's working with our interfaith partners or addressing issues, social issues in our communities at the adult level, youth level, in all the different areas that we can. So I happen to work with the youth very closely. I am a high school teacher at the Salam School in Milwaukee. And a lot of the work that I do particularly is focused around spirituality. And we understand that racism, as Rhonda mentioned, is sometimes we have to look at the heart and the soul, because we believe that racism is a spiritual disease. It's a disease of the heart that requires spiritual, medication. It requires a spiritual response to it, along with all of the activism and along with all of the movement that we do, it also requires us to reflect in ourselves, have that internal conversation and dialogue, and address those difficult questions. Because we are a very diverse, but also a very segregated community. And I speak more from a Muslim community perspective. Even though it's a very diverse community, we see the segregation in our Muslim community, where we have most of the African American Muslims who are on the north side of Milwaukee, and the rest of the immigrant population of Muslims are on the south side or the west side of Milwaukee. And a lot of times, because of that segregation, we find that these racial tendencies definitely exist. Our youth don't necessarily understand the importance of learning about racism, don't understand the internal biases that we have as immigrant Muslims in this country towards people of color and Blacks in our communities. And so we have to have those conversations. When I say we have to, meaning we're having those difficult conversations as we speak. Unfortunately, as an imam, I'm dealing with different situations where Muslim community members may have said something or done something that was racially motivated and offended a person or a community. And it's so important that we start this process, and I'm grateful to our co-panelists Sharon and Rhonda, who've sort of put together a system where we can actually look deeper deep inside and see like where we really stand, because all of us like to believe we're not racist. As a Muslim, I would love to claim that I am not racist. I would love to claim that I don't have this spiritual disease. But the reality is that every person struggles with this disease. And along with the physical tools that we have to address racism and to try to eradicate racism, we, from a Muslim perspective, as an imam, I continue to try to provide spiritual tools on how we can eradicate this disease from ourselves first, and then from a communal perspective, society, from this perspective of society. And this is where I personally try to collaborate with our interfaith partners. The Islamic Society of Milwaukee is a partner of the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, a partner of MICA. We try to work as close as possible with Dawah Center. Brother Will is a very dear brother of mine, and obviously I understand that many of these issues, it requires for me to work directly and closely with him and other members of the Islamic Dawah Center to help address these issues here. So that's the summary of some of the work that I am involved in, although much broader than the specific work that our co-panelists are doing. But I hope that we in the future in the Muslim community have those resources, right? Have those resources where we can actually address these issues. And I'm not saying this to shy away. I'm not saying that we because we don't have the resources, that it's okay for us not to have this conversation. I think the resources do exist in our communities, but because of our community being, because they try to close themselves off from the rest of the society, from the rest of the community, when we have the workers or activists within the community that can help sit down and have these conversations, address these issues within the community, I feel that it might seem to be more productive and hopefully more reap more fruit at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. And all of you have talked about anti-racism or anti-racism work as an intersectional endeavor, so that we have to look at multiple factors. We need to look at relationships with communities as a whole, relationships with people who identify as different, or people who are gendered or classed, and think about this in a comprehensive way. So how do you in your work tackle these different identity positions that compact the issue of racism in our communities?
Well, I can jump in. I want to, I may be indirectly answering your question. I wanted to piggyback on what was just shared about the differences in the Islamic community as it pertains to the African American Muslims, and then maybe Muslims from like maybe immigrant countries or things like that. But I want to say, really, what I find interesting about that is because I mean, all of those groups will be like lumped into just being like people of color, and everybody else, you're just non-white, so everybody is to this. So really what you end up finding, I think for me, in that is this is where you kind of get some of that, I guess that maybe think about being intersectional is the anti-blackness. And so that's really what I was thinking about as our last speaker spoke, was the anti-blackness that tends to show up for all of us. For Black people, for even if you think about the tensions that just all the things that just happen even towards members of the Asian community, or particularly people who think they may be Chinese. They might not even be Chinese. It could be Korean or whatever, but because they look Chinese, they get attacked, just because we're ignorant in that way. But even in all those groups, a lot of what you end up getting is when you start getting the tensions between our groups is because of the anti-Blackness, because whiteness has been centered. So the darker you are, the more despised you are. And you find that most communities whether you are like Middle Eastern or it could be even, you can include like maybe some Japanese, Chinese, Koreans. The lighter you are, the more you try to close yourself off, because you don't want to be lumped into the group for being Black, associated with that. And so I think that's a real challenge that we have yet to address within our communities. That's all been just kind of lumped into the non-white space, but it's really to address that, because that happens for all of us. That's that colorism, right? That the lighter you are, the better you are, because that's the closest thing to white. And so I think we all still have to overcome that and not fall into that trap, because that's the trap of white supremacy.
So this is an interesting point that you brought up. I'm in India at the moment, and this is something. I mean, my parents are born in India, and something I see in the Indian community being very prevalent. Right, the wider you are, the more special you are, and the darker you are, your parents worry about things like marriage proposals or things like finding someone suitable for you to get married to. In India for a very long time, they would push creams called Fair and Lovely, which would try to promote whiteness. And so yes, although we're not necessarily, as we are in America, trying to focus on the relationship between the Black community and the colored communities and the white communities, that colorism still exists anywhere you go, and it's always looked down upon if you have dark skin. Now, I mean, personally, just being an Indian with a darker skin color, I've seen that within our own community and how that's affected the way people will speak to you, or the way people will treat you, or the way people just look at you at the end of the day. So we definitely have what we call those that colorism within our own communities. But quite frankly, speaking from a Muslim community perspective, we do have a lot of racism or a lot of these sentiments when it comes to ethnicity. Right, quite frankly, right, and this is a struggle that we're having currently in the Milwaukee Muslim community, where where many feel that those who are from the Arab countries have a sense of security over those who are non-Arab. and that continues to be a struggle as well, and something that we try to address. So your ethnicity, where you're from, if you're Arab or non-Arab, the language that you speak, where you come from, all of these things actually affect our communities, unfortunately.
Yes.
I would, just a perspective on that. As a white person, I'm so incredibly aware of how blind and willfully blind sometimes, but how blind white people are. And I see these as really connected, that the anti-blackness and colorism across lines, as Rhonda said, they're rooted in anti-blackness, which is rooted in white supremacy. And there's such a connection between them. So if it's down when you talk about, how do we confront the intersectionality of the issues, I keep coming back to helping white people recognize that they are centered and everything else spins around them as the center. And until that is acknowledged, until they are willing to say, I need to change my orientation, it will continue. And that once you recognize it in one group, i.e. black or brown, or you recognize it in sexuality, you recognize it in class, you recognize it in ability, or at least that possibility is there. So sort of like, what are some opening points that can really crack things open? And once you do that, it begins to spread, I think, it can at least.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm back. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, so that's one of the tricks. I mean, I have to give this to you in from an Islamic point of view. You see, that's one of the tricks of the devil, and all of us being, in a religious-based group, and that's how this part of this conversation. So we have to understand and know that in the strategy of the Satan, and we have to all believe that Satan is a part of the creation as well. So the strategy of that is to get individuals, whether it be a group or otherwise, dividing amongst themselves. And one of those divisions is one thinks, because that was the downfall of Satan, in that Satan thought he was superior to Adam. And that was the beginning of all of that. That was the beginning of that racism. One particular creature in Allah's creation said, I'm superior over that other individual, of the creation. So if we fall into that, and I mean, we're all just human beings, we're not above a lot of our shortcomings and so on. So when you have the idea that something of me is better than you, you have a problem. We have a problem there, because everything is stemming from that, with the assumption that what I have is superior to what you have, and you don't have what I have. And as a result of that, you're inferior to whatever it is I'm doing. So no matter how well you do, no matter what you have, it's inferior to what I have. And that can go across a lot of different gamuts, a lot of different places, on a lot of different levels. But specifically as it deals with race, that's a game that's been played on Europeans for a long time. And as a result of that, we end up getting into a lot of trouble as a result of that. Then you not only have that issue about another ethnic or another racial group, you have some stuff going on internally. I got this particular clan or this particular group of this, from the north, from the south, from the east or the west. So if you don't fight with somebody else that's different than you, then you're going to fight amongst yourselves too, because you think you got something up on somebody else, and so does the other group. So we all get swirled up in that, thinking for some reason that we're superior to one another just because of what we look like, just because of our physical makeup, or maybe it may be our intellect, or maybe it might be our race. But specifically in race, we think that if one group thinks they're superior than another, then you got a problem with that group who seems to think so, because they're falling themselves, they're coming short too on their potential. Not solely as focusing on them as a human being, as my physical, my mental, or my racial superiority. So what I think that's the case, but you're actually missing the whole program. You're missing the whole program. And so as you keep on thinking that, and if you've been fed that long enough, then you believe it. And then you've seen it being practiced. But then what happens is you oppress other people. Other people are oppressed because you think, for whatever it is, that individual group or whatever thinks they're superior to the other, and you have the right to do whatever you want to do to anybody else. And so when you fall into that, you believe in that, and then you start oppressing others, then the individual group or individuals or groups that do that, you really are, that person or those individuals really are the losers. They really are the losers, because the oppressed person in Islam, the oppressed person, there's a connection between the one who's being oppressed and the one who created us. So the ones that are being oppressed has a direct line to asking for mercy and forgiveness and support for the ones who are oppressing them. So that's a dangerous place to be in. So if we're in the frame of mind thinking that, hey, because I have this particular race, because I have this or that, I'm superior to another group or individuals, and I can oppress them because my understanding of my faith or my understanding of who I am gives me the right to do that, then that individual is in trouble. That individual, those groups are in trouble. And as a result of that, Allah, the creator of the heavens and the earth, is just. He'll balance it out one way or the other. It's going to get balanced out. And that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. It could be our health. It could be our wealth. It could be our children. It could be something within our lives that we just can't seem to get it right. It could be that. It could be relationships and all of that. Because if you're oppressing someone, the justice has to come in there somewhere. And ultimately, it's going to come in the next life. So we're trying to get that stuff right while we're here, to fix that stuff right while we're here, because whether you Islamically, we got another time to answer for, because this is not it. This is not it. So we got to try. Yep.
It's like when scripture say the first shall be last and the last shall be first.
That's right. That's right.
But I think part of it too is, I mean, as we're talking about this from a spiritual context, and what I hear you saying and sharing is that place of hope. And I know that wasn't a question that you put out there yet.
Yep.
But I think that being people of faith is that even though we're wrestling with this intense racial oppression that we seem to not be able to get from under, that's been going on for generation after generation after generation, I think being people of faith, having that hope is what helps, at least what helps me. And it seems as though it's been something available to help a vast majority of us as people of color to find some meaning and find some place of purpose in our lives. So even when you think about the intersectionality of it all, I think part of that for me as a Christian woman, it is being able to say, I'm human and I was blessed with this life by the divine. So no matter where you find yourself, cross gender, cross sexuality, all the different kinds of isms that's out there, cross ability, you're still a human made by the divine. And so in that place, I line my humanity up with yours and say, I'm, as Brother Will has already pointed out, it's not me to be placed over and above you at all. But how can we, in this space of enduring whatever oppression we may be enduring, find the hope, really? How can we still be the light, be the hope, to project a more better place, to not be the people who would exact the same type of oppression on another that we don't like, that we don't want to be under? So I think it is, for me, having the hope that my faith brings, also recognizing that I'm made by the divine, and so are other humans. And so it's not for me to negate your humanity because it may be something that I think I may not like or agree with, or whatever. What are all the different things people come up with why they want to oppress another person? So I think when we start talking about racism, if we really look at white supremacy, especially in this country, in the United States, it really can start to help us chip away at those other isms. Because a part of talking about white supremacy, when Sharon and I are working on that, we talk about white supremacy culture. And it's a lot of things, a lot of aspects of white supremacy culture that spills over into the other isms. And so I think if we really allow ourselves to get a grasp on the ways that white supremacy has duped everybody, including white people too, as Brother Will mentioned before, that being in that space is harmful, not only to those that's being oppressed, but also to the oppressor. And so if we can really start to unpack that, I think that helps across a lot of the other isms as well.
You know, and that's why this type of conversation, this platform is so important to have some dialogue on this. Because in essence, the majority of folks we're good human beings. For the most part, we're good human beings. We're based on, you know, with on doing good to one another. It's just that when we get distracted, whether that be something, you know, in our daily lives or something outside of ourselves or something within ourselves that may fall short, because we're just human beings, we do have shortcomings. So it's really, we really have to support one another in the efforts to trying to do what's good, to invite each other for that which is good, and try to, you know, steer away one another from something that's harmful. And so from an Islamic point of view, that's another one of our tenets, and that we try to invite people to that which is good, and whatever that good is, that's what we're after, and to try to steer away from those things that are going to be harmful to our individuals, to families, and to communities. And whatever that looks like, you know, this is part of that process, is part of that effort. That can never be said that we haven't tried. Can never be said that we haven't given it an effort. And that's all we're being held accountable for what we try to do. For our efforts and our deeds, that's all we can do. The results is not left up to us. The results are not as to how folks are going to receive what we're trying to do and the work that we can't be judged by them. We're not looking for their approval. We're not looking to be judged by someone else. It eventually is all that we can do. And so, yeah, and there is always a sense of hope in that. And so that's the encouraging part in that, because we're working on that internally, each and every one of us. And it's good to have a collective group like this where you kind of sit with one another and see who else is on what struggle on this side of town, who's on what struggle on that side, and what are your struggles like. And you find out, you know what, we're going through some of the same stuff. We're going through some of the same challenges, our kids, our families, our places of worship. We're going through that stuff at work. Everybody's going through this, you know, this pandemic stuff. We're all going through some of the same stuff. So we need one another and supporting one another in the efforts and struggling through that. And again, as far as the results, we don't have any control over that. We only have control of what on the input. That's it, to the best of our abilities. So brothers and sisters, I certainly appreciate in you, you know, still being in here, you know, at the fight, so to speak, and on the ground level, you know, in the grassroots and getting this thing done, because we not everybody is called to do this. You know, not everybody's given this opportunity to be of service like this. So this is, again, it can be frustrating for those who are on the front lines and doing it, getting the work done and trying to the best of their ability. But many times it can be frustrating in that we don't always see the results. We don't always see the good in what we do, but it's all being recorded, and that's all we got. And so we need to help one another. We need to help support one another in that effort.
Mm-hmm.
So a question that I have for all of you is, as we try to address, you know, white supremacy in general, how do we continue to address the some of those white supremacy tendency within our own communities, within our own immigrant or faith communities? Because yes, we do agree, and we're on the same page in regards to, hey, that's where a lot of the issues are stemming from. But how do we not ignore then the work that needs to be done within our own circles, the work that needs to be done amongst people of color that still may have these white supremacist tendencies within our communities and within ourselves? So is there some work that's being done within communities of color, immigrant communities, where these issues are being addressed, along with the work that's being done to eradicate the notion and ideology of white supremacy?
For me, that's an excellent question.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an excellent question, and it is a lot of work that we do need to do. And there's been some work done on it's called internalized racial oppression. So the ways we have, as people of color, taking messages about whiteness, and internalize them, and now we act them out. So it is some work that's been done on that, but I'm interested. A lot of times when Sharon and I are leading groups, they're predominantly white groups. It may be a sprinkle of a person of color, because oftentimes it's hard to get people of color, in my opinion, I could be wrong, but maybe people are more ready now to come together, for us to come together as just a group of folks across the various diasporas that does not include European, and really have real honest conversations about what it is that whiteness has done to us. And what do we want to envision for ourselves? How do we imagine a world where whiteness is not centered? I think that's the world we've been presented for so long, no matter what community you are in, no matter where you reside across the continent, really, various continents all around the globe. My first trip to Thailand about 4 years ago, as soon as I got off the airplane, was advertisement for skin bleaching. So I understand when you say, you know, what you've experienced in India, it's all around the world. I recently heard a person say white supremacy is the only thing the United States has ever exported. So I think it is. I would, if you can grab a group of your people, I would be very happy, and I could grab a group of my people and we come together and really talk, really have real honest conversations. I would gladly participate and engage in something like that, because I really think that that's the next level for us to really investigate anti-Blackness and the way that shows up. Because a lot of in a lot of Black communities, it's a lot of Middle Eastern, Indian, Chinese, and Korean people who own businesses. And so that end up becoming friction between those communities, because by and large, you still get those people from those various groups treating the Black Americans that live there as white people would treat them. And so then it's still not getting us to where we want to get to. So I think that that's a conversation that is still yet to be had in a real serious way.
Yeah.
And I want us to do that. I'm open for that. So we should, if you're interested and want to keep talking about how we can do something like that, I'm down.
For sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that that's a needed step for us in our community. You know, Brother Will and I, and even the leaders of the Muslim community try to have, and we do have these conversations every now and then. But unfortunately, I think that we leave it at the conversation, right? And for us, I mean, when we think about our faith tradition, this notion of white supremacy actually dates back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because he's addressing this issue when he is present in Arabia 1500 years ago, where he is saying that a white person doesn't have any superiority over a Black person, where we read incidents within their life, right? These are people in the desert of Arabia, where the Prophet is trying to address amongst them incidents of racism, when someone is referring to someone else as a child of a Black woman, right? To disrespectfully, and the Prophet has to address that. So racism, although we're looking at it maybe from a very local perspective, it's a very deep issue. It's a very deep issue that for us goes back not just to our existence here, our life, or our existence here as people, as immigrants in America, but even for us within our faith tradition, back to the time of the Prophet, who indicates to us that this is an issue that has existed even before that as well. So, I mean, how did the Prophet address it? How do spiritual communities address racism? Sometimes the problem that we have is that we focus too much on one side. So a faith community may say we are only going to focus on the spiritual aspects of it. We're going to look at it only from an Islamic lens and address it that way, ignoring all the other great work that is being done. I don't know of any local work where we have racism looked at from an Islamic lens, but also combining with the tools that are available in our communities to address it. And so I am, and I'm sure Brother Will would be willing to as well sort of sit down and have this collaboration and conversation that we're having now, but taking it to the next level, taking to the next step, where we're actually applying some of these thoughts and tools on the grounds with our communities.
Oh, that's exciting. I'm sorry. I don't know if we're hijacking whatever you had planned.
No, no, please. He's
Okay. This is exciting to me right now.
Wonderful. To me too.
Okay. So we do a series called Living Out Liberation, Challenging Racism and Christianity, where we're specifically looking at the ways in which Christianity has been used to perpetuate white supremacy. And so we use a theological framework called liberation theology as a way of using that to center that as a way to say, hey, let's take on this theological lens as a way to start moving us away from white supremacy. And I would be way interested in and more willing to work with you and look at, because I'm Christian and I understand that better than I do. I haven't read the Quran front to back. I've read some of it. I had a one course, so that by no means give me any. I have no grasp to create a whole course, but I could definitely take that course and work with you to create something. What is a framework that Muslims would understand that would help say, hey, this is how we live in a liberated sense from white supremacy as Muslims here in the United States, or, you know, however it shows up around the globe, which you can start really when you start thinking about it is looking at imperialism and a lot of the ways that has played out. So I would be interested in, you know, having further conversation with you and working that out to center the Muslim framework within that. It's six sessions that we do, which is really giving folks who are Christian using their own language to say, hey, you already have the words. Here's an ideology you can follow that encourages you to say, I can live differently and do differently.
Right. Wonderful. I wanted to ask you before, am I interrupting you?
No, I was going to say that, you know, Ibtisam is actually part of the board of directors now at the Islamic Society of Milwaukee, and has been pushing some of this work and these conversations. So I think that, you know, she's been obviously key in organizing this, and I'm sure that she'll be key in trying to organize many of the future work that we can collaborate on as well.
I learned from you, and I'm inspired by you, and I'm willing to do, you know, what I need to do, of course. I wanted to ask you before we end, because we have 15 minutes. I see Amanda, and I'm worried about time. I wanted to ask you about bridging the gap between what you've just talked about, Sheikh Naaman, and what you've been talking, all of you have been talking about, bridging the gap between, you know, institutions, academia, and community work. And thinking about anti-racism as you know, a product of human beings being within communities. So our students are human beings within communities. Coming to the university, what can both the university do and kind of community organizations do to ensure anti-racism?
You know, charity begins at home, right? Charity and education begins at home. So my audio is okay, because I don't know what I'm looking at sometimes.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay. So charity begins at home. So I wanted to respond to that with another question as to some of our other panelists who haven't had much to say, and I'm looking for some input and some what's going on in the heads of some of our other panelists here. I'm just looking at to my left with Mary Ann. I'm asking, you know, what, you know, when the kids when they come to universities, the students get there, they've had some conversations at home. They've talked with some of their peers. They've talked to some of their family members. They've talked to, you know, they've been online on whatever platform they're using right now. So they've had some conversation that helps to build their character and build their view on things. So at home, my dear sisters, Mary Ann, and sister that may consider themselves being of European or white background or what have you. What kind of conversation? I'm not trying to take up too much time or detract this thing or derail it. But what kind of conversations are taking place in your place of scope of influence at home, or whether that be academic? What's taking place with your conversation there? Because we can talk all day here, but if there's another conversation that's taking place that's counter to this effort, or something that's supporting this effort, I'd like to hear about that.
Yes. So Dr. Chobuk, do you want to talk about what's happening you teach in what department? Education?
Yes, I'm in the College of Education, yeah.
So can you talk about some of the anti-racism work there, maybe, is what I'm hearing, Brother O'Perry.
Sure. Well, my first shout out would be to my colleagues who are several colleagues of color, colleagues who are younger than I, colleagues who have a lot more energy than I have at this stage of life, who are really picking up the mantle on that one. My own experience with it has been for about 19 years. I taught a course that focused on analyzing how race and class and gender affects society, affects the lives of people in society, and then how that bleeds into the policies of school and how the kids are affected differently, because a policy that may sound good in one setting ends up favoring the wealthier. It favors the white. It favors male. It favors heterosexual. It favors all the way across the board. Is exactly what we're talking about. And I think what I have struggled to do is to help my students understand that there is a heart and mind work that needs to be done. There is personal work that needs to be done, and it's enormous and it's challenging and it's well overdue. We don't stop at personal work, because my personal work will affect people around me, but the bigger influence of pain is structural. And so to teach students, because they stop at that, they say, "Oh, thank God I'm anti-racist. I'm not racist. I've worked on my heart. I've worked on my mind. My attitudes are pure." And I say, "Good for you, baby." But where is the step where you then say, how can power be shared? Power be turned over to people who have been disempowered? How can representation, whose faces are on the one of my students right now, she's a white woman teaching at Nicolay High School, and they're doing a unit on whose story are we telling, in literature. So to try and say it's more than it is hearts and minds, but it's beyond that. It's understanding the insidious nature of structural racism, sexism, classism, all these issues, and that's where we can affect the most change. So that's been the message I've tried to give. And some of them love it, and some of them give me really bad reviews.
And I mean, at Marquette University is what I know, but there's a lot of work in reforming classes that are geared toward exploring anti-racism in relation to the individual and to systemic issues. This has become, I think, part of the work that Marquette is doing, especially in recent times. So this combination of both institutional work and community work is something that I think all of us are thinking about right now. University.
Yeah, I think it looks like if the institutions, if you're a big institution, it's easy for you to swallow up a community effort. And so I think being a good partner is just that: be a good partner. Don't swallow up or take credit for someone else's work, but really learn how to support and being behind that community effort. I think that definitely, if there's an anti-racist effort being put forth by some local organizations in the community, and what they're doing aligns with what your organization or institution is about, then don't try to be the head chief. Go to the person who's already the one that is the chief operating officer, and say, "Hey, we learned about this. How do we come alongside? How do we financially support? Who do we need to follow? You know, how do we put the information out that this is what you're doing and we're supporting it? Because I think that could help a lot too with a lot. It's a lot of efforts that's grassroots out there that's doing things, but they just need the visibility. And some of the financial backing that a larger institution may have, or even just even if the larger institution doesn't put any money towards it, but just say, hey, we support that, giving credibility to that effort. That's important too. So I think being a good partner is just that, be a good partner and don't swallow up or try to take credit for someone else's labor that they already put into making something work. Figure out who you can follow.
Yeah.
Like centering marginalized voices instead of, you know, integrating them into the system and then swallowing them up. So represent and destroy kind of is
right.
Yeah.
And that's, I wanted to, I wanted to just 1 second before I forget. I want to give, a shout out to Marquette University. You've got a program there, and unfortunately, I can't think of the name of it, but one of our members, James Watkins, is one of the staff members over at Marquette, and he's working very closely with some of the professors there, and he's actually been hired as a co-professor or lecturer within the program, and so it's a graduate program. But you've got an individual who's got a lot of as a subject matter expert in dealing with social ills that we're discussing, who was incarcerated for over 27 years, and now you see he's at Marquette University lecturing to master's degree students on a number of different topics and bringing that close to home and down to earth for them. So I appreciate that with Marquette and opening up and starting that program. That's really opening up the eyes of on both sides for those who may be victims of, or those may be victims actually on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. So I wanted to give Marquette University that appreciation.
And it's important to celebrate, right? To celebrate progress in addition to kind of resisting some of the ills that we find in institutions. There is, ingrained racism in our communities, and Milwaukee is a segregated city. So there will be racism ingrained, and we need to work to resist that and challenge that in addition to celebrate, progress that's done. Yes.
How do we address the issue, I guess, of obviously racism we consider as definitely a social ill, a spiritual ill. And a lot of times when we have the conversations around race, some of the pushback we may get within even the Muslim community itself is, you don't have a right to speak on race because you're not Black, right? And a lot of times, although I understand, obviously the sensitivities around that, sometimes it just becomes a way for many people to deflect the conversation, to not be willing to hear or to address the issue. How do you in your field of work and your expertise, how do you think we sort of go around that issue? It's definitely important to have Black voices and elevate Black voices, and as we're talking about, making sure that narratives around those Black voices as well. But in a lot of our colored communities, right, when we're trying to do that work, especially amongst the young people, right? Because I find that they unfortunately, they're the only group that are more interested in this conversation of race compared to elders. And because of their just excitement and their zealousness in this area or in this wanting to have this conversation, it's always dismissing anybody who is who is not Black from trying to start those conversations. So what would be, I guess, any thoughts on how we could maneuver around some of those issues as well?
One thing that comes to my mind is, I think someone said, I don't know if it was Brother Will or my sister Rhonda, but that racism is not just an experience of people of color. It's a system that indicts all of us, and it damages all of us. It dehumanizes the people who are oppressed, but the oppressor is less human in that process.
Yes.
So being able to say, I cannot speak for Rhonda's experience in life, I certainly can speak for what I have learned about being a white person, the shame and the opportunity that's in that identity. So it seems to me that as many voices as possible, speaking from all the different angles in which racism has enveloped and seeped into our very fiber of our country and our world. There's more voices we have, the better off we are. But I really do agree. I cannot speak for my husband's experience as a male. I cannot speak for a person of color's experience, but we can come together and we can speak how racism has. It's like a monster with many tentacles, you know. And the more different voices from different sites are helpful.
Yeah, and I think you have to just it's part of it is racism. Racism has made Black Americans so vulnerable. Black Americans and I would say Native Americans as well, just so vulnerable and raw that it seems like it has to just be the issue for our communities. So I think that it's behooving to the other communities to tell your story. We keep telling ours and trying to get ours heard and trying to get people paid. And I think right now what we're seeing that happen for the Chinese, Korean, like the Southeast Asian communities. Like they're unfortunately, because of this last year with, you know, President Trump starting saying no, some of the racist things he was saying, and just everything that happened with the pandemic, and even now still living through the results of that, we're seeing their story and understanding that, okay, this is not something that just happens to Black people. It's not something that has just only happened to Native people, but so I think it is for those who say like, okay, hey, you may think this is you to another Black person, you may think this is all about you, but the other day this happened to me. This happened to my cousin or my uncle or my dad. You know, you have to own your own story and say it and not feel shame, because I think part of it is the racism. It makes you feel shame. Can make you feel shame that you have been a victim, because it say, oh, that's something that only happens to Black people, because again it get associated with this anti-Blackness type thing. But no, this white supremacy is happening to all of us. So you have to know your story, say your story, and be okay with sharing it.
Yes. And I mean, us thinking about Muslimness as racialized as well, this conception that it is, you are a part of it too. I think that this spreads awareness within Muslim communities that they have been racialized. I mean, that they, including myself, have been racialized. And this is why I believe intersectionality is so important here, not to think in binary terms, but to think about, you know, multiple intersecting forms of oppression, intersecting ways that people and communities resist. Yeah. And we are 3 minutes away from the end of our session. If, you know, I'd like to open up the floor for each of you to give a final statement if you'd like. It's been a wonderful discussion.
I'll yield to that. Thank you very much, sister. I'll yield to that.
Well, I would say thank you for forming the panel and creating an opportunity to be together and share. Good.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This lively conversation. I'm looking for follow-up. And I did put in the chat box the book, if anybody want to get that. If people are still watching, I put the book in there and some ways you can find Race and Faith. Our Facebook social media handle is Racial Progress, but you can also just look up Race and Faith, and our website is raceandfaith.org. So please do reach out. Let's keep talking.
Yeah, I pray for all of you success there, you know, in your efforts. We've got a lot of work to do, and it doesn't end here. So may you be blessed with success and good efforts in your endeavors. So appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you all for kind of teaching us about things of importance for us to examine. I appreciate all of you and all of the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.